Belfast, a modern city, but some old-fashioned campaigning. A fight to change a law that's been in place for more than 150 years.
The message is very clear, there's no will for a change in the law here.
When it comes to abortion, Northern Ireland has been left behind, soon to be the only place in the British Isles where it's illegal in almost every circumstance.
Disregarded, devalued, completely voiceless. It really makes us feel like we've been totally rejected as citizens.
Every minute of the day, every second of the day, you have to live with that knowledge, the child that's moving around inside you. It's a child who's going to die.
The big question:
We don't have a devolved government anymore.
It's respecting democracy.
is it time for politicians in Westminster to step in? So we're about half an hour outside Belfast, and we're on our way to meet a woman whose life has been changed forever, really, because she couldn't have an abortion here. And I know that some of what she's going to tell me is going to be quite difficult to hear, and it's going to be a real challenge for her to share it. Denise was halfway through her pregnancy when she and her husband Richard found out their baby had a genetic disorder called Edwards syndrome, which meant she wouldn't survive.
Not only would she be disabled in every organ and every sense in her body, but every cell would be wrong. If she did survive for a couple of hours or a couple of days, her suffering would be immense. So at that stage we had decided, the best thing to do, the kindest thing to do would be to have a termination.
To do this, Denise would have to travel to England, but she became seriously ill and bedridden, unable to make the journey.
I can't explain the extent to which it affected me mentally. I was literally tortured.
You obviously then had to continue with your pregnancy, not knowing when you were going to lose your baby.
That threw us both into complete traumatic downward spiral. People would be constantly congratulating me because I was so big and asking, when's the baby due? Everyone wanted to share in the good news, but we knew that we weren't preparing just for a birth, we were preparing for a death.
This agony was to continue for months.
Every minute of the day, every second of the day, you have to live with that knowledge, the child that's moving around inside you. It's a child who's going to die.
The current law here means it's illegal for a woman to have an abortion unless her life or health is seriously at risk. To break that law can mean life in prison. And because healthcare is devolved, any changes, in theory, need to be made by the Northern Ireland Assembly, which broke down last year after a row between the ruling parties.
So it's now been over a year and a half since the government here collapsed, and really since any decisions were made here. And in this time, the conversation around abortion rights here has moved on, particularly after the referendum in the south of the country. And so people are calling on politicians in Westminster to step in.
This is a way of getting people from Northern Ireland to be directly heard in Westminster.
Sunday afternoon in the centre of Belfast, and an abortion rights group is campaigning. Their aim is to get the UK government to repeal the piece of law which makes abortion illegal here.
So we have decided to do a letter writing campaign to Penny Mordaunt. She's the Minister for Women and Equalities. So we need to make sure that she hears from Northern Irish people that we want a change to the law.
Dear Penny, I am a relatively new resident of Northern Ireland, and while Belfast is an amazing city to live, the delay in women's rights here is frankly deplorable.
Yesterday at one point we were so busy that people were leaning on each other's backs because there was no space on the table. That would not have happened 4 years ago.
So what sort of things have people been writing?
It's completely wrong that people are forced to travel.
Last year, the UK government decided that women in Northern Ireland could have free abortions on the NHS if they made the journey to England.
Would English women be happy to travel to Northern Ireland for healthcare? I don't think so. we had a phone call from someone who was so desperate because they couldn't travel. They'd no travel documents. Their abusive ex-partner had destroyed all of their identifications. So how were they supposed to get across? If you can't get childcare to travel, if you're a lone parent, it can make it really difficult. And the option left to these people is to break the law.
But this is a divisive issue in Northern Ireland, and the anti-abortion lobby have their own campaign underway.
Is this 134? Hi, Bernadette.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jean. Nice to meet you. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Yeah, good to see you. Just some of the delivery for today. These have just arrived this morning. It's our new campaign, Lobby for Life. It's a postcard campaign.
This time, it's a plea to the Northern Ireland Secretary, Karen Bradley.
And basically what we're saying is that Westminster mustn't override the democratic process. Abortion is a devolved issue. From this weekend, we'll be starting to post them out. We'll be starting to collect the petitions on the street, outside churches. We're staying in Northern Ireland. Hello, how are you? I'm good. Campaigning away here.
You're looking
so
great.
if you can fill that in and send it off to the Secretary of State. There you go, we're just giving these 3 cards. I encourage you to send.
Appreciate the work you're doing.
Oh, thanks very much.
The message is very clear. There's no will for a change in the law here. And,
But we are at a church today. Do you think that's reflective of Northern Ireland in general? It is one part of the population here.
Yeah, but that's because that's where we are today. Our campaigns are reflective of the majority of people here.
This summer, Amnesty International polled people living here and found that 2/3 want abortion to be decriminalised. 2/3 also said they'd like Westminster to step in and change the law.
We've seen some recent polling data which suggests that actually the majority of people here want abortion reform of some kind, and that actually the majority would like to see Westminster intervene at this moment.
Well, we have a democratic process here. It's called devolution. And there are many laws that are devolved to the Northern Ireland Assembly. Are we going to make polls? Are we going to make decisions for all those other laws? And if you take that Pacific poll, it's based on 1,000 people. Now, 1,000 people is not representative of 1.8 million people.
Earlier this year, a UN committee found that abortion laws in Northern Ireland were breaching women's human rights, putting them in horrific situations that in some cases amounted to torture. Because human rights are not devolved, those advocating for change say this makes the UK government responsible. For Denise, who was carrying her dying child, the full horror was still to come.
We were told that, it was likely that she would die before birth, and at 35 weeks and 3 days she did die.
It would be another 5 days until she gave birth.
I had thought that she would still look like a normal baby, but she didn't. Her body had started to decompose.
I remember Denise said to me, what does she look like? And I said, she's beautiful. But I was trying to hold in the tears because I couldn't see. All I could see was a dark space where her face should have been. And when everybody left the room, it was just me, Denise, a dead baby, and silence until the morning, really. And that is an experience that I'll never forget.
It's very hard to bury a child that you've just given birth to. We were forced to go through that experience. That's something that changes your life forever, and we're still dealing with the trauma of that mentally. If I'd been allowed to have a termination early on, we could have then tried for more children, but we're not in a position mentally to deal with doing that because we feel like we've nothing left to give.
The government doesn't acknowledge that the current laws breach women's human rights. It insists this is a matter for Northern Ireland to sort out, not Westminster. But a growing number of politicians disagree, including some in Theresa May's own party.
I absolutely want us in Westminster to wake up to this and take responsibility for it. Real people are suffering in a way that is absolutely intolerable in this day and age.
The government has always insisted this is a devolved matter, this is one for Northern Ireland to sort out. Why don't you agree with that?
There are two problems with that argument. One, there is no assembly and there's no likelihood of an assembly. Secondly, actually this is about the rights, the human rights of citizens in the United Kingdom. I would be very surprised if the people of Northern Ireland don't actually want to have exactly these sorts of changes made to the abortion laws.
But I want to know if that is how people here feel.
So I've come to Freshers Week in the hope that it will give me a better insight into what young women in Northern Ireland want.
So how do you feel about the laws as they stand?
Kind of old-fashioned or something. I don't know how to explain it. I think they're outdated and stupid, for want of a better word.
I think if they were to legalise it, it would just be misused and everyone would just start using it as a contraception.
How do you feel about this idea that politicians in Westminster may decide to make changes for you?
It's only fair if we have a say. Yeah. It's not fair for them to make the decisions for us.
If there were to be like a referendum or something, say, like probably a majority would vote like pro-abortion.
So you'd like to see a referendum perhaps like in the South?
I think that's a better representation of what people think than what it would be if politicians were to come in.
Would you support a referendum on the issue then?
I wouldn't support any decision by people to decide on whether someone has the right to life. That is not our right to do.
This month, a private bill on decriminalising abortion will be debated in Parliament, which now has the backing of both Tory and opposition MPs. How many today?
27, which is really good turnout for a Sunday.
It's literally a ticking time bomb. Are we going to wait for the first woman to die before we do anything? It's completely out of order.
It just threw my whole world into turmoil, and I've really suffered mental torture, and I've just not been able to get back on track again. And we spend every day grieving for her. It's always in our minds.
To a certain extent, I accepted that our baby was going to die, but I could never ever accept that it's okay to force a woman to carry a dying fetus until it's born as a dead baby.
This shouldn't be happening to anybody. It really affects me deeply to know that other women have gone through that and will still go through that, and nothing is still being done.